The views and opinions expressed on this program are not necessarily those of this station, JVC Broadcasting Management, or its sponsors.
Welcome to Crime and Justice Radio, where we talk all things crime, justice, mayhem, and the courts with expert insiders and legal outcast. My name is Aida Leisenring. I'm here with co-host Bruce Barket. Bruce, what's happening?
Lots going on. How are you tonight?
I'm well. I went to court today.
I did too. People can't see this, but I have a shirt and tie on tonight.
I brought a blazer, and I sat in a little bubble plastic cage, and my client was separated in his little plastic cube, and the DA was separated in their little plastic cube, and the judge had like a massive plastic cube, and we were all masked up. And this is what I heard. I'll tell you exactly what went on. It was like South Park.
The adults on the Peanut or Charlie Brown.
Yeah, Charlie Brown, the teachers. That's probably what kids are hearing today.
Well, look, we shouldn't waste too much time on these silly stories, but I was in court on Friday.
Let me tell mine.
I was on court on Friday, and I misheard the bail number, apparently. I thought it was one thing. The judge was wearing a mask and not speaking loudly, and I thought I'd heard a number. It turned out to be another one. So I'm not quite sure why, and especially in courtrooms where it's so big, some of them are big enough that you're 6 feet apart by definition, why people still have to wear masks. It just seems to be more about appearance than it does about actual public health. But what do I know? Look, we're going to talk a little bit tonight about vaccine mandates, not vaccines. I know you want to take a vaccine, great. You don't want to take it, that's not my business. What we want to talk about is mandates. The government is increasingly finding ways to mandate a vaccine. And I'm curious as to what our listeners have to say about that.
So if you're listening, save this number. We'll repeat it throughout, 631-451-1039. And we're going to start off with that, but let's tell listeners.
Number 631-451-1039.
But before we get into it, I do want to introduce tonight's guest, who's a friend of yours. And he's a former Nassau County major crimes prosecutor, a practicing lawyer for 39 years, and a Hofstra law professor, Fred Klein. And he presided over some pretty high-profile cases like Amy Fisher and Joey Buttafuoco and other well-known cases.
But Amy's case is interesting. Maybe we'll talk about, maybe we won't. Fred is one of the best trial attorneys that I've ever met, and I've been practicing with some pretty good ones for the last 35 years or so. Brilliant man, excellent, insightful, led the Homicide Bureau in Nassau County for a decade or more, and tried some of the most serious homicide cases, including serial killer Joel Rifkin. But we'll get to him in the next segment.
And you and Fred, as you know, prosecutors and defense lawyers alike, have many, probably thousands of times, as I have, been in front of a judge when you're arguing for your client's release. And I want to tell a quick story about what happened in the Southern District here in Manhattan.
Federal court.
This is a new trend, dare I say, because since this story, another one is propped up. I call it under the gavel. Judges are starting to force vaccines as a condition of people's release or a time-served plea. So apparently a female defendant, I think she was a young mother, Dominican, was charged with drug trafficking, which is a fancy way of saying, selling drugs. And she was eligible for bail, as many similarly situated clients are, but a judge could theoretically remand her if he finds that she's a flight risk or a danger to the community. In this case, the judge said, "Do I have the power to force you to get a vaccine?" And the defense lawyer said something like, "I don't know." And he said, "I'm going to make that a condition of your release. So you can either stay in jail or I will give you the option," which, by the way, comes with an ankle monitor device and home confinement and a vaccine, right? Arguing that she would otherwise be a danger to the community. And that's not my understanding. We'll get to the statute that actually applies, and I don't think would apply here at all. And then recently, Judge Zimmerman in the Bronx set vaccine as a condition of a time-served plea. The defendant in that case was charged with a number of minor crimes, including drug possession and shoplifting. I think it was a misdemeanor plea. And he was prepared to plead guilty, and the prosecutor agreed to the deal. But this Bronx judge stepped in, approving the deal, but adding his own little condition that the defendant had to get a COVID-19 vaccine.
So can I interrupt for a second?
Interrupt.
So I'm going to stop and think about and talk about the judge's logic here. Here's his logic, Judge Rakoff from the Southern District of New York, for why he could mandate a vaccine for somebody that is otherwise justified to be released. In other words, she's not a danger to the community in terms of the criminal conduct. She's not a flight risk. It's simply a question about the virus. And he says, it seems obvious that the court has ample authority to impose such a condition. And then he goes on to say, for example, pursuant to the Bail Reform Act, courts commonly require that a person, such as the defendants here, who is being accused of drug dealing, remain 24/7 in home confinement while wearing a burdensome electronic bracelet at all times. And he goes on to list a number of other factors that relate directly to the crime that the individual's committed or been accused of, and designed to stop the individual from committing a crime. And he takes that and says, well, if I can do those things, which is exactly what the statute says, then I can impose this other condition and mandate a medical treatment, which if you don't get, it's not illegal not to be vaccinated, at least not yet. And for a number of people, they've simply chosen not to. They don't think it's in their best interest. Maybe they have religious objections to it. Maybe they've already had the virus and that immunity is sufficient for them.
But just to be clear, the danger to the community prong that the judge was using as a means to force this vaccine on this woman, otherwise send her to jail. And look, the choice was pretty easy for her. She's got young kids at home that she needs to take care of. She can't afford to be detained. But it was based on the 1984 Bail Reform Act, which added a new ground for denying bail, danger to the community. So pretrial release could be denied if the court found that there was no combination of conditions that could assure the safety of any person or the community at large if that person was released. And what we do as lawyers is we always look at the legislative intent behind that statute and behind that factor. And based on the case law, it's pretty clear to me that the change in the law was said to reflect, and I'm quoting a Second Circuit case from the 80s when this first came out, the deep public concern about the growing problem of crimes committed by persons on release, and the recognition that there is a small but identifiable group of particularly dangerous defendants as to whom neither the imposition of stringent release conditions nor the prospect of revocation of release can reasonably assure the safety of the community or other persons.
And safety is criminal. Committing other crimes.
Right. So the person that had been arrested 7 times for violent crimes and was now charged with a homicide, the judge would say he's a danger to the community, right? And that's a very limited, small, identifiable group. The court specifically said in this case, it is with respect to this limited group of offenders that the court must be given the power to deny release pending trial. But I read an article that was talking about what this Southern District judge did here in Manhattan, and they said it's kind of like denying bail to smokers because secondhand smoke can cause cancer, right?
And it's not even like that for this woman because she's home confinement anyway.
Right.
It's not like she's out and about. And look, this is part of a trend, especially in New York City, to mandate vaccines. I'm curious as to what people think about it. It's 631-451-1039 if you want to call and give us your thoughts. One of the things that they've done in the city is said restaurants, stores, bars, gyms, and other establishments have to check for vaccine proof before they're allowed in. And one of the store owners that Rocco's in Bay Ridge, Brooklyn, if you're there, stop by. Great food.
And they have a Manhattan location as well.
Oh, they do. And stop by and see how good their food is. Speaking to the owner there over the weekend, I had an opportunity to stop in, and her perspective is, why is this my job to enforce vaccine mandates issued by the mayor? How am I involved in this? I just want to bake cookies, serve espresso, and get on with life and let my customers do what they want to do, and has a big sign out in front of her store that says, we don't discriminate against anyone, on race, creed, color, religion, sexual orientation, so on and so forth, and included vaccinated or unvaccinated people, which I thought was quite interesting, and I think true. And again, I'm not saying don't take the vaccine. I'm not commenting about it. I'm talking about the government mandating it.
Do we have someone?
Gil?
Gil.
Let's bring up a listener.
We have a caller.
Oh, we have a caller.
It's not my dad.
So, is Gil there?
Yeah, hi. This is Gil from New York. I love hearing your show, and I can't appreciate what you guys do enough. What I would like to know, what we can do here, being the people out on the island. Is there, what can we do to get to our city councilmen to understand that this is clearly, at this point, our civil rights are being revoked?
Well, Gil, we live in a democracy, right? And the beauty about a democracy is a democracy accepts all people whose opinions are differing, right? And you have
not on this issue, they don't.
No, but they ought to, because that's what a democracy is, right? So a lot of people are afraid to voice their opinion because they're afraid they'll be socially exiled or berated by the masses. But people that feel the way you do, or the way I assume you do, should speak out. And they should make their voices heard, like they're doing all over France, all over Spain, all over Italy, all over England, in numbers that I haven't really quite seen in New York, probably because the majority of New Yorkers like these rules.
I don't know if they do or they don't. We'll see how this develops. One of the things that I think is happening, and who knows, maybe we'll get a Klein or two, is Northwell has mandated vaccines for all of their employees on pain of termination. So this is going from courts releasing individuals, business owners, patrons of businesses, and employers. And it is, look, take a vaccine, don't take a vaccine, should you, shouldn't you, do whatever you want. But we can't. The thing that causes me concern is the government forcing this upon us, especially given the uncertainty of how this virus is spreading and the number of people that are catching it. Let's go to another caller. Pete.
Thank you, Gil.
Pete from Jericho.
Pete.
Yes.
How you doing?
Good.
What are your thoughts on this?
I beg your pardon?
I said, what are your thoughts on this?
Oh, I don't know. I was too small to remember, but when I was a kid, I had to take smallpox, and I had to take. Well, I don't think I had to take the polio, but we took it, and I'm vaccinated. I think you're foolish if you don't take it. But I do know a fellow that was in the Marines, and he was required to take shots, and this guy got so deathly ill that he applied for disability benefits. He gets 100% disability. So yeah, it could be dangerous.
And what's interesting is, and a lot of people don't know about this generally, and I'm not talking about the COVID vaccines, but with all vaccines, you can't sue the manufacturer. You basically sign away in a contract a right to litigate in what's called the vaccine court. And so it's a difficult decision for a great many deal of people. So you're pro-vaccine or pro-vaccine for yourself. How do you feel about other people being rejected from?
Well, I think they should get the vaccine, but not mandated. Sooner or later it's going to catch up to them, and may catch up to them. We don't really know. That's the problem. I took the vaccine. It'd be crazy not to take it, I thought.
Right, and people look. It's widely available. A lot of people in New York, 70% of the people are fully vaccinated. There's a statistic that Governor Cuomo put out, over 70%. So that's fine. The question for us, and the reason why we're talking about this tonight, is the legality or the constitutionality of these mandates that are coming at individuals from a number of different sources: the courts, business owners, employers, and so forth.
And for me, the courts really, if they're forcing a defendant to do something that involves their body, it's an entirely different playing field than being admitted to a nightclub.
Pete, thanks for calling in. Call back again, and I hope you keep listening. I want to move to.
We'll get there briefly, but I just want to make some closing remarks about this.
Okay. Go ahead.
One, and I respect everybody's choice to do whatever they want to do and whatever they feel is best for them for whatever reasons. But a person's freedom should not be conditioned on bodily autonomy. Secondly, the danger to the community clause of the Bail Reform Act was meant to address criminal danger, not the hypothetical danger of a healthy individual maybe contracting the virus on some future date or legal but risky conduct. 3, making a vaccine a condition of bail or a time-served plea is coercive. Make no mistake about that. 4, it disproportionately impacts a minority group, like forced sterilization cases that disproportionately impacted minorities. And I don't know if this statistic is correct or not, but right now, the demographics of the inmate population of the jail complexes on Rikers Island is 56% Black, 33% Latinx Hispanic, 7.5% white, and 3.5% mixed race. So think of the disproportional impact mandates like that would have on people facing freedom versus jail. Lastly, some might arguably say that it's irrational, knowing now that vaccinated people are still spreading the virus. What is the difference between that female defendant and someone who's vaccinated but is still able to spread it? And the slippery slope odometer for me says, what's next? It just makes me very uncomfortable. How about giving people tests for HPV or sexually transmitted diseases because they may be released and go out and have sexual relations with other people? What about proof that you don't smoke? What about proof that you don't have tuberculosis, right? Some people might say, oh, well, these are good things, but they shouldn't be decided quickly on a whim before we don't have all of the information in. So those are just my 2 cents. Oh,
those are important thoughts, and I don't know if we'll come back to this or not. I guess we will as the courts begin to address these mandates, because no doubt individuals are going to bring legal actions to fight them. But I want to talk briefly about Julius Jones, who's an inmate in Oklahoma on death row, and who was featured on a show that you produced or co-produced on ABC called The Last Defense. Tell us what's going on with that and what can we expect in the coming weeks?
So Julius Jones has been on death row for over 20 years. He was arrested when he was 19 years old, a freshman at the University of Oklahoma on academic scholarship. There is overwhelming evidence of his innocence, and at the very least that his conviction was wrongful and racially charged. And in terms of people that support him, and not that fame should matter, but we have Dak Prescott of the Dallas Cowboys.
Some of us are huge Cowboy fans, but go ahead.
Blake Griffin of the Detroit Pistons, Kim Kardashian, Common, John Legend, Brian Stevenson, the Congressional Black Caucus, the Archbishop of Oklahoma City, the president of the NAACP, obviously Julius's parents, his high school teachers, and at least 6 million other people who have signed Jones's clemency petition. Apparently, according to a study, over 60% of Oklahomans support that he receive clemency.
So what's happening? What's coming up?
On Monday, September 13th, there will be a live parole hearing, and the final parole hearing where the Board of Parole will make a determination on whether or not to grant him commutation of his sentence, in which case he would be released. And we will hear on that day from the prosecutor, who adamantly opposes it, the existing family member of the victim, which we haven't heard a lot from, so that will be interesting. And Julius is not permitted to testify because of some infraction in jail, but his lawyers will be reading a statement. Very unfair.
Well, people an infraction in jail, usually the punishment is jail punishment.
It's not, you can't go to court. You can't litigate. You can't. You
can't beg for your life. This is a death penalty case after all. Look, we're gonna come back to this again and again. I think the Julius Jones case is fascinating. Plus, we have the ultimate insider here. Aida did the television show Last Defense all about him. And we should have some interesting guests when that comes to fruition and we get an answer to it.
And hang on for Fred Klein, one of the top prosecutors of all times. Welcome back to Crime and Justice Radio. I'm Aida Leisenring. I'm here with Bruce Barket. And with us right now is Fred Klein, who's been an attorney for the past 39 years. I realize I'm aging him a bit. And a prosecutor for most of that time. He's now Professor Klein, teaching at Hofstra Law in areas of criminal procedure, trial advocacy, and criminal externship programs. Prior to that, he was the chief of Major Offense Bureau in the Nassau County District Attorney's Office. He personally tried well over 100 felony prosecutions, some of the most serious crimes, and was the attorney on the Amy Fisher, Joey Buttafuoco saga, the Joel Rifkin serial murder, and the kidnapping, torture, murder of a Hofstra student. We welcome amazing Fred Klein.
And frankly, one of the best trial attorneys I've ever seen in my 35 years of practice. Fred, welcome. Great to have you here.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here. It's nice to at least talk to you on the phone. See where we go.
So, talk to us a little bit about what it's been like. I know I'm going to kind of hit you with this right off the bat. What it's like to deal with a family who's lost a loved one to a homicide, and then they have to go into court and battle. And most of the
a savvy lawyer like Bruce Barket.
Well, most
Not
of the lawyers,
a savvy lawyer, an excellent lawyer.
most of the lawyers who try homicide cases from both sides are excellent lawyers. It's kind of part of it. Not all for sure, but most. So what is that like from a personal perspective?
Well, certainly being a homicide prosecutor and dealing with the family of the deceased is probably one of the hardest things that a prosecutor has to do. It's the only prosecution really where you can't put the person back to where they were. You can't bring back the deceased. You can't bring back the mother, the father, the husband, the son, daughter. And, people it's probably the worst thing that's ever happened to them in their lives. So my goal was to just try to treat them with respect, to be as transparent as possible, and let them know what the case, how it was proceeding, what was likely to happen in the future, and to get their input on what they would like to see happen as much as I was legally able to do.
And when you're sitting, we all know the worst part of every trial for every trial attorney is waiting for the jury to come back. After you've completed your summations, you've done all the work that you can possibly do, oftentimes a year or more of preparation, hundreds if not thousands of hours of work, and then you just have to sit and wait for 12 people to decide. What is that like with the family? It must. We do it. I've done it from the other side. I've never prosecuted a homicide case. But what's that like sitting with the family waiting for that verdict?
Well, I may surprise you, but I always found that one of the more kind of relaxing parts of the prosecution.
You and I are very different.
My job was over. There was nothing else I could do. I tried to make the family comfortable. sometimes I'd have my most in-depth personal conversations with them at that time, trying to get their minds off the stress that they were feeling at the moment.
I'm going to agree with you because the trial itself is the hardest, right? I guess mentally.
I found the preparation for the trial, making sure that all your witnesses were ready and showed up, as the most stressful part of it. During the trial, you were trained to do it, were taught to do it, and you just do it. But the preparation is just anxiety producing.
If I could be put into a coma after my summation,
I would support it.
And awoken when the verdict was about to be announced, I would opt for that every single time.
But like you said, when you have a homicide victim, nothing you do is going to bring that person back. If you're sitting next to a man charged with murder, it feels like everything I do will have a direct impact on him. Literally, whether he goes away to prison for decades or has freedom. So I appreciate what Bruce is saying. My emotions and anxiety go through the roof while I'm waiting for a verdict, but it doesn't compare to the work that's involved in the preparation and actually cross-examining witnesses.
So with respect to the system, you were a prosecutor for almost your entire career as a trial attorney. Is that right? Did you try any case?
Yeah, I'd say I was a practicing attorney for 35 years, so 30 of them were as a prosecutor.
And you're a law professor now, right?
15 years.
Unbelievable. I can't believe it's been that long since you've been in the court. I swear to God, I walk into the court, and there's a couple of people I think of when I walk into 262 Old Country Road, which for those who don't know, that is the main courthouse for Nassau County criminal cases. And I walk around and I think of you. I think of one of our friends who is retired in Florida now. And I can't believe it's been 15 years. Can't believe it.
It's been a good 15 years. 3 grandchildren and a great second career, but it's been a long time.
How has your perspective on the system changed? Tell us what it was like when you were a prosecutor doing it, and then how has it changed after you've left and have taught students and been a professor?
That is such a good question, Bruce. When you're a prosecutor and all you do day in and day out is handle cases of people who've been accused of crimes, you develop a certain perspective. You try to keep yourself objective and open-minded, and I think that's very important for a prosecutor. But, you're dealing with police officers on a daily basis. You're relying on them for the cases to be put together. So you do develop a certain bias in favor of law enforcement. I don't think any homicide prosecutor who disagrees with that is being honest. Being as a teacher, on the other hand, which my wife was always my idol because she taught while I was a prosecutor, and then I got the chance to do it. It is just so liberating and affirming. I get to pay back the system and give back to the system that gave me a great career, and then I also get to pay it forward. I've trained literally hundreds of people, students, who have gone on to be local prosecutors. And if they remember any of the things that I've tried to teach them about being fair and having integrity and being humble, then, that will become part of the system with those hundreds of young prosecutors. And so I feel, grateful to Hofstra for giving me the opportunity. And I also feel it's just a wonderful second career for me to be able to take what I learned over 30 years and teach these students maybe to avoid some of the mistakes that I made.
You mentioned that in your role as a prosecutor and in anyone's role that's doing it for that long, you try to be objective and not have only a prosecutorial slant. Have you ever prosecuted someone that you later learned turned out to be innocent, or that was later cleared, that popped out in your head or made you pause and say, oh my goodness?
You hit the hot question.
I know.
I had one case, unfortunately, where 3 people were convicted of a rape and murder and spent a long time in prison. Eventually, they were cleared, as you say. DNA said that 2 of the people didn't have sex with the victim. One of the persons who were charged had not admitted to having sex, so the fact that his DNA wasn't found there wasn't, to me, that significant. But, I go back to something that I had a conversation with Barry Scheck about this, probably during the course of the post-conviction proceedings in that case. And I've read a lot about it as a teacher, and I think there's just a psychological makeup from people who are engaged in the adversary system. You fight so hard, you come to believe with all your might that you're doing the right thing, and the people that you convicted are guilty. And you then, when evidence comes out that maybe they weren't, you tend to have a psychological block and try to rationalize it in any way you can that, explain away the evidence. And the case I had, my objective, normal intelligence tells me that they shouldn't have been convicted beyond a reasonable doubt, so they weren't legally guilty. But my gut still has a hard time accepting that.
And that, I don't want to, pat you on the back too much, but that is a unbelievable insight to be able to say, intellectually, I see what everybody else sees, but subjectively, I feel something different, because we do a lot of the wrongful conviction work, as you know, and we run into prosecutors and police all the time who will fight to the death the move or the effort to exonerate somebody. One case, I remember saying that the belief that this individual is guilty is a rock against which all logic and evidence is smashed for the prosecutors. It doesn't matter what evidence we put forward. It doesn't matter if we had it. And I literally took a deposition of a detective who took a confession from somebody who turned out to be, who was exonerated. And I asked him, if I played you a videotape of somebody else committing the crime, would you believe it? And he said under oath, no, that person, pointing to my client, is the murderer. So it really is fascinating to hear you speak about this in the way that you do.
It's instructional to those officers that have conviction integrity units or review claims of wrongful conviction that the trial prosecutor should not play a part in that investigation.
No,
that's fair.
That's a great point. And let me shift a little bit if I can. One of the individuals you prosecuted was Joel Rifkin. And for people who don't know, he killed or was convicted of killing 17 individuals. Is that right, Fred?
Well, I don't know if he was convicted of killing all those people. He had confessed to killing 17 people. I firmly believe there were more.
Wow.
I think he was probably convicted of maybe 10, 12 of those. I don't know that he was convicted of every one.
And in that instance, I remember you being on, I think, Geraldo to talk about the show, or not talk about the show, but talk about the case. And when he turned to you, and if I have this right, turned to you and said, "What do you think?" And you made a comment like, "Why would we give this man any credence at all, any attention at all?" And I, in my mind, what was it like to be in a courtroom with a serial killer for that long?
Like a legitimate serial killer.
It's funny. Well, it's sad, really. He was just a sad sack-looking guy. I mean, to look at him, if you didn't know what he was charged with, you would think he was, just some kind of unemployed vagrant that wouldn't hurt a fly. So I didn't feel a lot. I just really didn't. I tried a couple cases against other serial killers, not as prolific as him, but they were on their way. And I was much more concerned about being in the room with them because they just appeared dangerous, and the things that they had done were so much more violent.
Have you ever had a dangerous situation where, and it's not always the person charged with murder, sometimes it'll be, a misdemeanor offender. Have you ever felt fear in your position as a prosecutor?
The last case I tried in the Nassau DA's office was a defendant. Reginald Gauss was his name. He had kidnapped a bank teller from down in South Shore and tried to get the vault key from him. And when he resisted, he killed the guy. And Gauss was just, evil personified. The evidence against him was overwhelming. And he stood up in court and started verbally attacking one of the best judges that ever appeared in front of, Judge Gerald Carter. And not only was I sad to have to hear him yelling at this judge, but I was frightened because he seemed to be getting out of control. He was a very large guy. That's the only thing I could think of where I actually had a degree of fear. But Judge Carter, just kind of shrugged it off.
So how do we improve the system? If we gave you kind of the keys to the kingdom for a week or a month or a year or two, what would you do with the system to make it better?
So we're what? We have like 3 or 4 hours to discuss.
We have 3 or 4 minutes
in
at
30
least.
seconds.
Could you point me to an issue as opposed to improving the whole system?
Sure. Well, let's talk.
How about mandatory minimums? What do you think of that? We have over 2 million people in prison in America.
The reason for that is because legislatures stopped trusting judges. Right? They didn't want to give the judges that much discretion because they were concerned that the judges were being too lenient and therefore they had to set mandatory minimums. So, if you want to get me started on judges, I'll talk about judges. But I think the manner in which we select judges in this area of the country is insane.
Which is they're elected.
They're elected. Nobody knows anything about them. They're not allowed to campaign like a regular elected official. And people go in and most people vote by, their party affiliation or their name of the judge, maybe their ethnicity. They know nothing about them. And frankly, they get put on the ballot, sometimes having to do with the merits of their career and sometimes not.
It's not merit selection for the judges.
But I'm with you 100%. I don't hear people say that enough. And it's something that affects prosecutors, defense lawyers, victims, and those accused, right? But by electing...
Well, don't get me wrong. There are some really great judges
of course.
In Long Island. But it's more of an accident. They happen to be great lawyers and great judges and great people, but somehow they get nominated in a system that has nothing to do with their qualifications.
Right. And they become, I'm not saying every judge subscribes to this, but ultimately we have sitting politicians, not sitting judges. And I want my judge to follow the law, not follow the trends or the climates or what he thinks, the headline in the newspaper is going to be, but strictly follow the law. That's all I ask.
Yeah, but if that's your goal, then you also have to, I think, do it differently than having them elected, period.
Exactly.
I mean, if judges are worried about public opinion, then they're going to not necessarily go out on a limb and try to help somebody.
Right. Well, let me narrow my broader question down a little bit. We were talking about wrongful convictions. How do we slow that rate down? Who knows how many people have been wrongly convicted that are in prison now that shouldn't be? But certainly one is too many, and the numbers that we have is outrageous. Is there a way to kind of better ensure that we don't convict the wrong people?
Yeah. Well, first of all, as you know, Bruce and Aida, our system is set up to make sure that we don't convict the wrong people, right? If people are presumed innocent, the government, it's the burden on the government to prove their guilt, and they have to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. The problem comes in when you let human beings in and you have prosecutors that are playing games with the evidence. You have defense attorneys who are under-resourced or maybe not qualified for the case or maybe haven't gotten paid and aren't giving it their full effort. And you've got judges that may not be able to run the cases professionally as they should be in the courtroom. So those three things, improving those would certainly go a long way towards improving the system.
It's interesting. The first thing you mentioned was prosecutors not playing games with the with the evidence. And you trained individuals. You were involved in. I think you gave a lecture at the class that when I entered the DA's office. I think you gave a lecture to our class as part of our training, and you're training students now. And you spoke before about training them to be humble and to follow the rules. It's so important to do that, because I don't think people realize that we come into this system as lawyers on kind of almost like babes in the woods, right? That I ended up working for Dennis Dillon, not James Catterson and Tom Spoda. I swear to you, I'd be a different lawyer if I had grown up professionally with a different DA.
Were you both in Nassau together?
Bruce, that's not true. You'd be the same great lawyer no matter who you work for.
I don't believe that. I think that there's good people that are out in different counties, and we were taught when we were in the office, if you hid Brady material or hid Rosario material, which is exculpatory material or evidence you're supposed to turn over, you get fired. There's no doubt.
So were there quotas? Like, would you get promoted if you had a certain amount of convictions? Because I know they did that for city prosecutors, so they were constantly trying to get your client to take a plea.
No, we didn't have that, but you got promoted if you
did
won.
you, Fred?
Yeah, it wasn't so
explicit.
Yeah, but certainly your success in the office is going to result in you being promoted. Whether that success is trying cases, whether it's getting convictions, whether it's getting a lot of pleas, whether it's not having a backlog of cases because you're inefficient. Or you get complained about by the cops or by witnesses. Success is what got you promoted. And part of that success is, winning the cases you're supposed to win.
Yeah. Look, keep training people well. Thank you for coming on. We're about to run out of time, so we have to stop the 3 or 4 hour discussion now.
Thank you, Professor. It's been an honor having you on our show.
We'll speak to you again soon. Take care.
Thanks for including me in the discussion.
We'll be back next week on Crime and Justice Radio with Harvey Weinstein's appellate lawyer coming in to chat with us about the progress of his case, and we'll take on some other issues.
The views and opinions expressed on this program are not necessarily those of this station, JVC Broadcasting Management, or its sponsors.